In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about massive drone strike that started yesterday in the morning, and this massive drone strike still hasn't finished. So let's discuss this in details. And let's talk about the reports that were provided us by the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. And according to the first report of the 21st of May of 2025, by 3 p.m. of Moscow time, the Russians managed to bring down 34 Ukrainian aircraft type aerial vehicles. Later, the Russians provided another report, and according to the next report, the Russians during the period of time between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. managed to bring down additional 30 drones. So in total, we see that by 6 p.m. the Russians destroyed 64 drones of armed forces of Ukraine. Later, we got another report, and the Russians stated that during the early evening of the 21st of May of 2025, the Russians destroyed another batch of drones in quantity of 37 pieces. So in total, we see more than 100 drones by 8 p.m. Later, we got another report from the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, and they stated that during the late evening, the Russians destroyed another batch of 77 drones. And later, more precisely this morning already, the Russians provided their latest report. According to the latest report, the Russians destroyed 105 drones. So in total, we can see a very big number of drones that were destroyed by the Russians during the period of time between the 11 a.m. of the 21st of May of 2025 and 6 a.m. of the 22nd of May of 2025. And once again, according to information we have, the Ukrainians hasn't finished. They are sending more and more drones. And the most important of these reports is that every single time the Ukrainians launched another wave of drones, the drones were getting closer and closer to the capital of the Russian Federation, to the city of Moscow. So most likely, and according to all these numbers, the Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours managed to break through Russian layered air defense system. If Ukrainians continue, most likely today we're going to receive lots of videos and updates from the city of Moscow itself, lots of drone strikes, which most likely will force the Russians to strike back, and most likely the Russians can use something bigger and something more powerful than just drones. The Russians could use Oreshnik missile system. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, but obviously the situation is very critical. Now let's talk about the situation on the ground, and first let's discuss the situation in the South Donetsk direction. According to information we have, the Russians continue their offensive operation along 0510 road. Today, this morning more precisely, several pro-Russian resources reported that as a result of offensive operation, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Zeleno Pole. Furthermore, the Russians managed to outflank the settlement of Novopol from the north, and most likely during the upcoming 24 hours, the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from this area further in the western direction towards the village by the name of Timirovka. And you know that based on all these reports, I came to a conclusion that most likely the Russians are planning to attack not in the direction of the settlement by the name of Pokrovske, which is located to the northwest of the original roads of attack. We expect and we believe that the Russians are going to move further in the western direction with the purpose to attack first the settlement of Uspenovka, and then the Russians will try to attack the village or the city of Gulay Pole from the northeast. The thing is that this is probably the best way how the Russians can carry out their offensive operation. The thing is that there is a very big and huge anti-tank ditches line in the north, so this is the first anti-tank ditches line, as you can see, and there is another one anti-tank ditches line which goes from the settlement of Gulay Pole in the direction of the settlement Okhotnichi. So as you can see, there is a gap, and we believe that the Russians are going to move exactly between these two anti-ditches lines with the purpose to attack the city of Gulay Pole from the northeast. Obviously, if the Russians are able to take under control this territory and to break through Ukrainian defense belt this way, obviously this can lead to complete collapse, and this can lead to the situation when the city of Gulay Pole would be caught and cordoned by the Russians. Obviously, the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back, and they're going to lose one of the most powerful stronghold in the Zaporozhye direction. This will allow the Russians to advance further in the western direction with the purpose to outflank the city of Orekhov. So we expect that this is exactly what the Russians are going to do during the next several months and during the summer military campaign. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians continue improving their positions around the village of Volnaya Polya. This information was provided by several pro-Russian resources. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kamar direction. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians began assault operation on this village by the name of Odradne. This morning, the Russian sources published this video. And in this video, we can see how the Russians were dropping different applications and different lists suggesting and proposing Ukrainians to surrender. Those Ukrainians who are currently located on the territory of this settlement. Obviously, this is the first sign that something big is going to happen in the very near future. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Ukrainians abandoned several very important positions. For example, in this video, we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking this stronghold of the armored forces of Ukraine. And when the Russians destroyed and reduced this stronghold almost till ruins, the Ukrainians were forced to fall back. So basically, in this video, we can see how Ukrainians, under the pressure of Russian artillery forces, were forced to fall back from this stronghold along this river of Yashorova. So we expect that this territory would be taken by the Russians in the very near future. Furthermore, according to information we have, according to several pro-Russian resources, the armored forces of the Russian Federation have already managed to answer the village of Odradne from the south. Several mappers have already made adjustments on their maps, and for example, according to pro-Russian resources, the village of Odradne is in the southern part and in the eastern part are already under complete Russian control. So due to this situation, we expect that during the next 24 hours, the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back further in the northwestern directions towards more reliable positions. Now let's talk about the settlement of Bogatyri. Today we have several reports that Ukrainians during the previous night carry out more or less successful counterattack in the direction of the northern part of the settlement with the purpose to establish a flag on the territory of the northern Bogatyri. And today several pro-Ukrainian sources have already published this video with Ukrainians with Ukrainian flag in the territory of Bogatyri. Ukrainians use the situation to tell us that the village of Bogatyr is still under complete Ukraine control, despite the reports that we got during the previous days from the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation and from pro-Russian resources. So as you can see that the situation in the Kamar direction remains very difficult, but despite all difficulties, the Russians continue offensive operation. The Ukrainians from their side are trying to counterattack with the purpose to get another immediate victory. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Dnipro direction. During the previous 24 hours and during the previous night, according to information we have, the Russians managed to answer the Dnipro region at least in 2 areas. So let's discuss this in details. Today, several pro-Russian resources adjusted their maps, showing that the territory in the western directions to the west of the settlement of Troitska was taken by the Russians completely, and according to several pro-Russian mappers, exactly in this area the Russians managed to cross the border between the region of Donetsk and the region of Dnipro and to answer the territory of the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. So this information was provided by pro-Russian resources. Furthermore, we have this video, and in this video we can see the Russians that indeed got the border, and that the Russians established their flag along the border. So as of now, as of the beginning of the 22nd of May of 2025, most likely every single resource you saw this video, but as for now it's very difficult to geolocate where exactly the Russian soldiers in this area established Russian flag. Some sources are saying that this happened to the west of Troitska, some sources are saying that this happened somewhere else. The Ukrainian sources reported that those Russians that established Russian flags along the border were destroyed. So as you can see, the situation is very complicated, and both the Russians and the Ukrainians are trying to get the immediate victory. But obviously, the Russians have better positions in this question. Furthermore, when talking about the village of Novonikolaevka, today, according to neutral mappers and according to pro-Russian resources, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the western part, over the eastern part of Novonikolaevka. And when talking about this village, we see that there is also a border between the region of Donetsk and the region of Dnipro. So if this information is correct, if the information that was provided us by neutral mappers and by pro-Russian resources is correct, correct, this means that the Russians managed to answer the border in the second place. So according to all these reports, we see that the Russians most likely managed to cross the border between regions not just in one place, but at several places at the same time, which is very, very important and which is very, very huge media attack against Ukrainians during Ukraine's massive drone strike in the direction of Moscow. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the city of Pokrovsk. According to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions to the north of the village of Shevchenka. Additional tree lines and additional street was taken by the Russians, as for now without any proofs. When talking about the Kliban-Byksky pockets, probably this is the first morning when we haven't received lots of updates from this territory. We expect that during the next 24 hours we're going to receive additional updates, but as for now we have what we have. First of all, we have adjusted the map in the western part of the village of Novaya Poltavka. Today, the Ukrainian sources published this video where we can see how Ukrainians were bombing and attacking with the use of FPV drones Russian positions in the western part of the village. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map. Basically, based on these videos, most of the mappers adjusted their maps. When talking about additional changes on the ground, today neutral mappers confirmed that the Russians indeed managed to move further in the northern direction and to reach outskirts of the village of Popov Yar and Poltavka. So once again, this is the situation according to neutral mappers, and let's compare the maps. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 21st of May of 2025. Just a second, and this is it, and this is the situation by the end of the 22nd of May of 2025. The Russians managed to take under complete control these big territories, and the Russians managed to get the outskirts of these villages. So this is very important, because if this information is correct, then most likely the Russians managed to cross a lot of anti-tank ditches in this area and to create additional roads and engineering probably constructions with the purpose to cross these trenches and to cross these anti-tank ditches in future for further and for more Russian forces. Furthermore, we continue receiving reports from the main supply lines between the cities of Pokrovsk and Kramatorsk. Today we got this picture, and this is the visual confirmation of Russian FPV drones reaching the Dobropolye-Kramatorsk road. So we discussed the situation many times. I'll remind you that the Ukrainians used TO-514 road for logistic, and now we see that the Russians managed to improve their technology so much, so they have no problems to control this territory with FPV drones. And the most important thing is that the distance, let's say, from M32 road, these new Russian, let's say, positions, and this road is around 30 kilometers, which obviously is very, very important achievement of Russian military technology. Furthermore, the Ukrainian sources reported that the situation with the logistic is very difficult for the Ukrainians in the city of Pokrovsk. The Russians indeed established complete control over this territory with FPV drones. Now let's talk about the Kliban-Byksky pocket. We have just one important update. According to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions to the west, to the northeast of the village of Romanovka. Additional tree lines were taken by the Russians during the previous 24 hours. This is the map by the end of the 21st of May, and this is the map by the beginning of the 22nd of May. The Russians continue offensive operation in the direction of the village of Katerinovka with the purpose to cut and cauldron the Ukrainians in Shcherbinovka and Novospaskaya. As for the city of Chasov Yar and Konstantinovka direction, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything special. The only interesting report we got is that Ukrainians during the previous night and during the previous days counterattacked from the north in the Liivka in the direction of the settlement of Druzhba, and according to several sources, the Ukrainians managed to restore some positions in this area, including this stronghold. So as for now, without proofs, but a few days ago the same report was made by the same mapper that the Russians captured this territory. So basically we have returned everything as it was. When talking about the Sivers direction, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything special, just several artillery strikes on Ukrainian positions along the river of Seversky Donets. So which means that the Russians are trying to move in this area with the purpose to outflank Ukrainian positions in Serebryanka and Grigorovka. As for the Kupiansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, nothing special. As for